In today's complex environment, almost every major project, from mining to transmission lines, is contentious. Hi, my name is Allie, Meeres.
And I'm Byng, Giraud.
Welcome to Primary Risk, where each month we speak with the people behind the projects shaping our world.
We'll be hosting candid conversations and hearing from industry leaders, political figures, engineers, and project proponents. We'll be exploring the soft issue risks, challenges, and solutions, and behind-the-scenes stories of what it took to get these complex projects across the finish line. Or not.
Melissa Caouette, principal of MC Consulting, is a Canadian public policy specialist, political strategist, business owner, and writer. She has held roles in both the public and private sectors, having worked as a bureaucrat and political staffer for the Alberta government, a multinational law firm, and 2 national public affairs firms, before launching her own company in 2021. With over a decade of experience in Canadian politics and policy, Melissa is a sought-after advisor to small, medium, and large companies across Canada. She is also the founder of an innovative public policy platform, Pocket Lobbyist, which Cedric is, of course, a subscriber.
Yes,
original subscriber. We get the discount.
You're like an OG.
We're one of the founding
I'm just
subscribers.
waiting for her to raise the
I don't
rate.
forget. It's like the mafia. We don't forget.
Yeah. So usually this time of year, as we head into the summer season, Byng and I come on and do a solo podcast, and we rant about big public policy and political issues facing major projects in Canada. But we thought and are really humbled to have one of who we believe the leading public policy strategists in Canada, Melissa Caouette, on today.
Thank you.
And I think she'll really add a depth of knowledge because she's from Alberta. She lives in Alberta. She does work, of course, across Canada, but primarily Alberta and British Columbia. So she'll really be able to add a depth of knowledge to our rants that we have.
And things are hot, right? I mean, like Western Canada, it's not temperature-wise, I hope not. But
they're hot temperature-wise
hot temperature,
outside.
yeah.
We'll get to that later.
We're not going to talk
before
wildfires
the podcast started.
But with what's going on with the Premier's desire to build the Alberta Premier's desire to build these pipelines, the interface with Prime Minister Carney, the critical minerals, Carney saying you don't need the Strait of Hormuz, we got it covered. Recently, I mean, I'm summarizing, but that's essentially what he said. So talking about Alberta and BC, where most of the major projects are that are being proposed, is a worthwhile conversation and a good way to start the summer.
Yeah, so thanks for coming on today, Melissa.
Thanks for having me. Anything for Byng and Allie. I was just thinking that I feel like Cedric started just about around the same time that I started my practice too. So it's super fun. It's going to be 5 years for me this year. It's like probably 6 or something, 6 or 7 for you guys.
But the first year we just said a Numco because I was too lazy to name it until Allie made me.
No, it's just awesome.
And of course you rented an office from us.
I certainly did. I certainly did.
Just the PTSD still...
You subletted the office and you do so much media and you had this big sign on your door that said, "Don't come in, I'm on camera."
Yeah, because I have major anxiety about like those types of things, and if I can't control my environment perfectly, I start to get a little funky. So thanks for dealing with me on all the projects we've worked on.
Here for you.
In the office, because I'm a little finicky.
Here for you. Well, before we dive into all the public policy issues, we want to actually talk a bit more about you. It's really important for our listeners to kind of learn a bit more about all of our podcast guests. So how did you find your way into politics? Where does that passion come from? Was it your time in the Alberta government? Can you give us a bit more detail on that?
Yeah. So, there's probably a very polished way to describe this. I was so drawn to politics and public policy, but the reality of the situation is I was not good at math and I was not necessarily going to go into business. And so I pursued political science in university, and I was very anxious because I, at the time, was a server at a restaurant, and people would ask me what I was doing, and I would say political science. And they would say, "Oh, the only person that I know that is a political science major is XYZ job that I didn't necessarily want to do." So I thought it was really important for me to be a self-starter at that young age and try and get involved in politics. And that's really what I started doing. I was so nervous about not being able to get a job after university. Like, this was in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis.
It was a recession.
That uncertainty. Exactly. So I just started volunteering and ended up putting my hand up for a lot of just unpaid work on campaigns, and then ended up getting a paid job on a campaign. And then from there, ended up working in the Premier's office and kind of launched into my political career.
And what Premier did you work with?
I worked with Premier Jim Prentice And that was a really, really whirlwind of a time because it was only about 9 months that we were actually in government. And then the longest reign of government in Alberta ended in 2015 after 44 years. So I've been through some ups and downs, certainly in politics. And I think it's taught me a lot in terms of how to navigate uncertain times because I've been there and lived it.
Well, I'm much older, so I've been through other uncertain times.
Yes.
But when we lost, I was there when the Solcrids lost in 91, and then the Neverendum was lost in 92, and the Feds lost in 93. So I went through 3 massive losses, and I actually, it's one of those things you look at. It's like that experience probably made me a stronger, public policy aficionado or expert in those things, at understanding how to lose, right, and understanding the dynamics of losing. And I find a lot of political staffers who've never been in the opposition or have never been on the losing side either have a level of naivety or a hubris to them.
Yes.
Right?
Hubris is a good way to put it. I think that there was this certainty that I thought when going to work for the Alberta government, like the Progressive Conservative Party always wins. This is going to be job security for me for the next few years. I'm going to grow and develop. And then I was still actually completing my undergraduate degree at the time as well. So I had no job, no degree, no real prospects because I was quite young and there were so many people that were looking for jobs. And so it forced me to forge my own way and be a little bit different in that respect because nobody was necessarily looking for 22-year-old inexperienced politicos at that time.
What kind of inspired you to move from, other than not having a job or prospects?
That's really what motivates me.
What motivated you to kind of move from political side to eventually going into private sector and then ultimately starting your own business?
Yeah. So the job loss was a good motivation because it was really given no choice. So that was motivation. But then I decided to finish my degree. And so while I was finishing my degree, I kept volunteering and kept sort of staying involved. And then I ended up ultimately going to work for a multinational company. And that was a really good start for me because so many people go from working as staffers to being lobbyists or doing things that are political. And I was really grateful for that time of working at the law firm in their public policy group because it gave me this step between politics and business and showed me just how important it is to not only have yourself be in one realm if you're trying to mitigate political risk. Like you can't just have the mindset of a staffer or a politician, and you can't just have the mindset of a business person because these are relationships where you need to talk to people that are not necessarily in your realm and negotiate and collaborate to get things done. And so I think that was a really good way for me to see what I now coin as, political risk is business risk. Marrying those two separate realms in that way was really informative for me. So it was good to sort of see that, politics is separate from business, but they're very much linked and depend on each other.
So we talked about Pocket Lobbyist, which I think is an innovative tool, but that's part of your whole. And I watch your short videos and those things. I like this transition of what government relations is. I mean, back in the day, again, dating myself, like old social credit government. You wanted something done, you walked in and, saw your buddy, the minister, or, that you went golfing with. And like that was, and that's still the caricature of lobbying. But it's a lot different. You talk about this a lot. Like it's not grandpa's lobbying, right?
Well, I think there's just more than just grandpa's lobbying. Like there's definitely still certain people who operate in that way. And I think that's fine. But what's changed over the past 20, 30, 40 years is just access to information, whereas 20 years ago to contact a minister's office, you would have needed to know somebody who has the phone number for the minister's office or the email. And I believe that it is actually very easy to get in touch with government these days. Like the information of how to contact somebody is not really the barrier. The barrier is more so what you're going to say when that person picks up the phone or how you're going to approach the issue. And so I think it's become more strategic in that way. And I think that despite that all of the talk about, people are losing faith in institutions and have a negative view of politics, I actually think that politics is more transparent now than it ever has been. And it just keeps getting more transparent because you can't do anything these days without somebody finding out about it. And so I don't think that's the barrier of like getting things done behind closed doors. It's like actually brokering deals and finding solutions that are going to work for the public, for whatever the stakeholder is, and for the government too. So it's just a different environment. We're not dealing with like scarcity of access to individuals like we were. Even just the advent of LinkedIn, like you could find anybody in any professional space now with that technology. And I think so too is the same thing for government.
Yeah. And you know so much more about them because it's all
Yeah.
online. So you want to find their background, what job they had before.
Yep.
Maybe what they like, what they're interested in because their hobbies or volunteer organizations are listed. It's
Totally.
it is much more transparent. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, the interwebs.
The interwebs, yeah. I know that's like people, and this is the thing too, is people ask me like, oh, what do you think about AI and how that's impacting? That was never, I don't think that's really the value proposition of a good strategist and a good lobbyist. Like telling you all of the data points about somebody is really just the first part of solving problems with government. So I think that'll just make good lobbyists better and bad lobbyists not better.
Lazier.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't think AI is going to necessarily disrupt that type of work. I think it will help in some ways, and I think it will really push you to use more information to make decisions versus less.
Totally.
Well, I want to jump into the podcast, and I was joking with Melissa earlier that I feel like I'm going to be refereeing you to nerds today that like to speak about public policy. So we are going to shake up today's format. You know, usually we have people on and we ask them questions about projects and things that they have been a part of. Today, we really want to focus on public policy as a topic. So we're going to discuss key political themes that have emerged across Canada, in BC and Alberta, and all across Canada, and their impacts on the major project sector.
Yes.
And
So if you're a major project junkie and you're only listening to it for major projects, fear not. We're still going to do that.
yeah, we're still coming back to you. Don't worry. So we have three major themes we're going to focus on, and we are going to talk about specific potential projects and issues under each of those and tie it back to major projects. So the first one we want to talk about, one of my favorite topics actually to nerd out on, is jurisdictional creep. So maybe you can talk, Melissa, by telling us a bit more about that topic and how excited you are about it.
Yeah.
Not that creep. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think this is a really interesting one because we've had so many, I mean, we're sitting here in June 2026. And so there's obviously a lot of topical discussions about provinces sort of negotiating with the federal government. But I think what is sort of not really appreciated about Canada's system of government is, you know, to summarize, we really have a combination of the American and British systems of government. We have a federalist form of government like the United States does, where there's different orders of government, provinces and the federal government. In the United States, that's states and federal government. But we have a political system that's a lot like the British system. So it's really interesting because we see so many influences from the United States and we can compare, but we do have influences from the British system as well. I think that we have seen, you know, after 10 or 11 years of the same government federally, you have provinces and, you know, doesn't really matter whether it's a left or right government. After a certain amount of time, people start to complain and try to sort of talk about what they do and don't like. And I think there's some of those negotiations happening right now. But really in Canada, when you build a major project, you have to deal with at least two orders of government and regulatory, and that's the provincial and the federal. And I think the way in which over the past decade or so, the relationship and the sort of lanes of both of those jurisdictions has become less clear. And we've seen an increase in, the federal government taking a stake in or a role in some things that provinces say is their jurisdiction. And you see courts kind of interplaying on what can and can't happen. And so I think when I talk about jurisdictional creep, it's really, okay, who is the decision maker and what are they looking for? And what degree of certainty do I have that is actually the decision maker to give me clarity in how I approach my major project. So that's something I think about a lot. And I'm sure you guys do as well with your clients.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually I'm curious what Byng thinks about how that would be applied to something like UNDRIP, because we have seen that happen in British Columbia over the last calendar year. And when we think about court systems being final decision makers on things, or, you know, I guess interpreting legislation in certain ways, like that does have an impact on major projects.
Yeah. Well, I think this is going to be a commentary on the judiciary or the judicial system is we've gotten to this situation where the courts are starting to dictate about what things that should be done by the legislature. And I'm not even going to entirely blame courts. You can talk about judges who are trying to make policy, which they shouldn't be. They should just be ruling on policy that's already in front of them, that's created by the legislature. But part of the reason that's happening is the parliaments and legislatures don't have the courage to tackle these issues. So the judges end up doing it for them. And we can blame the judges, and sometimes you should, because there are activist judges, and I think we've really gotten away. Like if you look at Section 35, I don't think anybody who was there, and we talk about sort of the founding fathers type thing, anybody who was there in 1982 anticipated what was going to happen. Anticipated that. So I think that there has been some judicial creep, but part of that is because the parliaments and the legislatures, which is ultimately the leaders of these political parties, left, right, and center, haven't had the courage to actually address these things, and they'll just kick them down the road until the courts say, "Well, now you've got to deal with it." And that's kind of what happened with UNDRIP. The promise was we're going to bring all this legislation in alignment. That was the promise. Whether you agree with it or not, that was the promise. Well, the government didn't do that, and sort of, they originally had sort of a report card on how they were keeping up with this, but I think that all sort of just drifted off and died. So, yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate, but you can't just put all the blame on activist judges. You can put some of it there.
I agree. I think that it's a useful political tool for governments at any order to sort of say, "Oh, I'm not going to say anything about this because it might hurt my politics or my getting reelected." And so I think Byng's right on that. I think, but undeniably, it creates uncertainty, because if I have to guess or anticipate what's going to happen, not because of what's written in regulation or, a particular decision, but, how long is this going to take by going through the court system, and what is the ultimate judgment or verdict going to be at the end? That is the uncertainty that I think makes it hard to deal with. And you also don't necessarily sometimes, when you're approaching some of these issues, know like who is the person that I am supposed to be dealing with to actually rectify this issue.
Yeah, if it's just going to go to if everybody's waiting for this seems to be the sort of standing operating procedure, which is ridiculous. Politicians and us who are around it waiting around for the courts to make decisions. Well, why not pass some legislation? Maybe it's going to end up in a court anyway, but why not pass some legislation? At least try, because that's what you're supposed to do, right? I mean, that's what the purpose of legislature is. Here's a good example that is impacting major projects across the country. We see it certainly in British Columbia. Is the Saltel case, where an Indigenous person from the United States came up and shot a moose in the Kootenays, and that went all the way to the Supreme Court, and they basically ruled that those people because the border came after, it's artificial for First Nations, that they did indeed have rights across the border. So, but that was only part of it. Like, that individual has some Indigenous rights. So now we've got cross-border bans, First Nations, challenging major projects. Lummi challenging Roberts Bank 2, Colville tribes challenging mines in the Kootenays and in the Okanagan, bans from Southeast Alaska challenging mining projects in Northwest BC. We're going to see it more and more in Ontario and Quebec, anywhere that's close to the border, and we're all close to the border, somewhere in Canada. And we see governments sort of waiting, because we all know what's going to go to court again, so they're just sort of waiting around. Well, why not pass some legislation in the House and sort of stand for your conviction and say, listen, yeah, maybe individuals have rights. We can't go against the Supreme Court, but those political entities have no rights. Those Indigenous rights are protected by the First Nations on this side of the border. So if you want your Indigenous right stood up for on this side of the border, you go to the chief of the nation that's on this side of the border. Those political entities have no rights here. Why not pass legislation like that? It's because we've all gotten, we'll just wait for the courts to sort it out. We've gotten lazy and weak. Right?
And I think as well, part of what I see is what you're talking about is clarity and certainty, which is what major projects and really anybody who's doing anything in terms of development needs to operate effectively. And, you see this, sometimes it's about not needing to take a strong political position for political expediency, but also sometimes the Overton window of like what is allowed, what is not allowed, the way that we have conflated political and regulatory decisions over with morality and all of these different things, I think it does give politicians the latitude to say, okay, well, whatever way the wind's blowing, then I can have some, grace with this, because giving certainty, as Byng said, causes you have to take a stand and you have to say, this is what we're doing.
You're gonna offend somebody.
And we think of things in today's world way too black and white in many ways. Like we don't necessarily appreciate the nuance, and we don't necessarily appreciate that just because a decision was given on something doesn't mean that there weren't other considerations as well. I think we think of some of these things a little too narrowly, and we don't necessarily give politicians the credit and the latitude of they're balancing a lot of different interests as they should. That is their role.
Yeah, and I think about things like the Major Projects Office as an example, and set up by the federal government, of course, in Alberta with employees from across Canada. And that's another interesting one, because it is the federal government sort of setting up a new process for projects. And we've heard from some of our clients, we don't want to go through that office because we don't know what the process is. And to your point on certainty, I mean, they know the existing system and they've gone through the existing process before. So
they might not like it.
They might not like it.
Devil they know, right?
Absolutely. And so when I think of this jurisdictional overreach, even with that, I mean, I know there's going to be projects eventually in British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, other places that go through that. And then you're going to have issues arise through provinces saying hey, what you're doing at MPO, that's actually our, we should be doing that.
Our jurisdiction.
And I think there is many things that the current government federally is doing that are great, and they're sending awesome signals to the international market, which we really need.
Certainly an improvement.
But it was, and maybe it's making up for the last decade, but they also could have maybe accomplished that by just loosening up some other rules, but that wouldn't have been as sexy. So,
and all of this is so relative too. Like, better than before isn't necessarily good. And I think that sometimes in Canada we do get a little bit, it's part of our culture a little bit to not be too harsh and to be understanding. Yes, exactly. And I think that when it comes to some of these things, I mean, I think the Major Projects Office and the initiatives that the federal government are taking are absolutely great because of the signal that it sends, that they're interested in incentivizing and sending a signal, as you say, Allie, that major projects can and will be built in Canada. I think, just to play devil's advocate for critics of that, I think there are people who think, well, that signal could have been sent by repealing XYZ and just taking a step back too. And so I think that the way that this federal government has approached that has allowed them, as we've said, to say that they are doing something to take action on major project development while also maintaining for certain parts of their political base that they have not removed certain environmental protections that may be contentious, et cetera. So it's really trying to do a lot of things with...
You got a new coat of paint, but the wood's still rotten.
Correct. Right? Yeah.
We really want to move to political leaders, which I know
Do we
is
have to?
one of your favorite topics around here for anyone that listens to our podcast. But we really want to focus on this as a theme. So when we think of political leaders, oftentimes in modern day context, they're elected on a really specific platform or a really specific attitude, right? They're environmental protectionists or they're capitalists or there's some sort of theme that they're going after. But then once...
Or populists.
Yeah. Most of them populists. Yeah. But then once they get into power and they're actually governing, they govern very differently than how they were elected to, keep basically everyone happy or to actually they're in government, they're in power now.
It's a truism, and it's not new, right? You run sort of to the hard right or left of whatever your political party is. You run to the sort of that's going to mobilize people who are members. But then once you're in government, you kind of got attacked to the middle of it because you still got to govern for everybody, right? So it's not as new. It's just maybe more amplified by things like social media. I mean, it's kind of always been the way.
Well, and amplified because there are more populist politicians now.
Yeah.
Maybe all politicians are populist to you.
But historically, British Columbia has, we've been ruled by populist leaders. People sort of populism has been equated to Donald Trump now, but that's not exactly the case. Our leaders in British Columbia have historically been populist. W.A.C. Bennett, maybe not so much his son. Glenn Clark was a populist. Bill Van Der Zem was obviously a populist. Christy Clark was a populist, right? We actually prefer them in British Columbia. I don't know. You may have some comments.
I would say that's similar in Alberta as well. One of the misconceptions in Alberta is that it's a really conservative province, and I would say it's more populist than it is conservative because not to be too nerdy, Allie, sorry, but if you look at our books and our social programs, like it's not the small C conservative political ilk that you would see traditionally. It's a sort of mix of like identity politics conservatism with populism and strong social programs. So I would say we're like that as well, for sure.
Maybe could you dive in, Melissa, to explain this concept using Premier Eby as an example, because he's now been in power for a couple of years and
He's deciding he has to be a populist because that's how you win.
exactly.
I'm going to build a dam.
Well, this is the thing, right? Is
WAC
that
version 2.
it's characteristic in leadership roles in companies as well. Like when you're not the one in charge and you are criticizing or looking on to the people who are, it's very easy to say, well, I could do this better. And when I'm in that role, I'll handle it differently. But then reality is there and annoying because you can't do all of the things that you think you would want to do in theory because they don't work and they don't actually drive towards the things that you ultimately want to accomplish. So I think that with, Eby, it is leaders who are extreme are not compatible with like running stable governments typically, because
Certainly not in Canada.
Not in Canada. The reality of being a political leader in Canada is that people want certainty, they want consistency, they want you to try and improve things, but they won't be too upset if you don't either. Like it's more steady as she goes. And I think that if you have very strong opinions, whether be they right, left, or otherwise, and you want to express those in your leadership role in government, you're going to run up against problems because that's actually not what people want. And I think the way that this links back to major projects is maybe before we had such a wave of populism across Canada, or like Byng said, the advent of social media and all these different voices in politics, maybe it would have been enough to know your lobbyist and, make your case to government and have certainty on decisions. But the challenge for major projects when you have increasing populism is it's actually not the government that you need to convince, it's the public, right? Because if the government is a populist government, they're going to listen to what the public wants. And so the task is actually much harder because it is not just a few decision makers. It is the entire public or enough of the public that it will move those decision makers. And that's, I think, a major way that projects have changed.
You're absolutely right, because I think what companies are learning, some, not all, is that, historically, I think major industry in Canada, because I think sort of the political culture of Canada was like, just be under the radar, be circumspect. But you can't do that anymore. Everybody knows what you're doing. And they're taking videos of it and putting it on social media. Everybody knows what you're doing. This is a postmodern situation where everybody's opinion actually counts, right? So this notion that let's just lowball it and it'll go away doesn't happen anymore. So if you're gonna, pipelines, nobody talked about pipelines 20 years ago. Like it was a non-event. But now you can't even build a transmission line, electricity, without it being a political controversy, right? Like those things weren't even issues. Maybe oil was an issue. Maybe the product was an issue, but the transportation of the product was never an issue. And now that's almost the biggest issue. But and those companies have had to learn, I can't keep my light under a bush. I actually have to go out and fight for myself.
Absolutely. And I think the ability to storytell, this is so characteristic of major projects of like, what is the story of that project? What is the narrative that you're presenting? And who are the characters that are engaged in that, I think is so important because it is about winning hearts and minds in many ways. And it hasn't been before because everybody has a line of sight into what's happening. To Bing's point, 20 years ago, you'd kind of hear about a project as it was developed. Now you hear about it at literally every single stage, inception, investment, all of these things. So it's just everything is under a microscope. And I don't necessarily know that governments like Canada work best when I like transparency. I'm not saying we should not have transparency, but to understand the complexities of government and to be able to have a really informed opinion on what those things mean. It's not just every person on Twitter who sees something that's going to be able to have an opinion. Well, they can have an opinion on that, but it may not be comprehensive in terms of all the things the government's thinking about.
Yeah. It is a criticism of the private sector is, why doesn't government just do this, or why doesn't government just do that? This project we know is good for the country, and it probably is, right? People aren't doing these projects for malevolent reasons. They're doing them because they think they're the right thing to do and they're going to make money, but they're not understanding all the considerations a politician has to face. So Eby, let's talk about some specifics. So Eby, if you look at his background, he was sort of downtown east side, social advocate, sort of a defund the police type thing. They went through some phases here with the deregulation of drugs and things you would sort of, you would ascribe to that more left of center. But here it is, now we've sort of been there for a while, realizing the nature of this province, that only appeals to a certain segment of the population, and he's come around. And I don't think it's some sort of conversion on the road to Damascus. It's realization that these projects our economy needs these projects. So we see a premier who probably instinctually didn't like LNG, who's now supporting LNG. Probably a premier who instinctually would have been against large-scale hydroelectric, and now we see him going forward. And some people see that as hypocrisy, and other people say it's flip-flopping. But in some respects, it's a sign of maturity, right? It's like I have to be realistic.
And it's a sign of maturity in that it's a recognition of, I always like to equate Maslow's hierarchy. You cannot convince somebody of a higher level political idea if they feel their public safety and basic needs are at risk, right? So you cannot make a case of some of these more esoteric ideas if you don't first take care of people's ability to feed themselves and their family and feel safe in their communities. So that's a reality as well. Sometimes something that worked in one period of time when the factors and socioeconomic conditions were one way won't work in another time period. And that's part of politicians' jobs, is to understand that and provide leadership that's going to respond to the moment versus just stick to rigid beliefs. So I would commend Eby for moderating on some of that for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, he's facing a groundswell of potential development in the province where we have had a couple of years of not a lot of development and a lot of the larger projects have dried up. So his ability to do things like large-scale hydro, if that's the value set, they just want to do hydro. There has been some rumblings, I don't know if it's been made official, around, more natural gas potentially as well, coming back into the
There's
province.
a business case for it now.
Yeah, and
well, I would have argued with our former prime minister, there always was a bloody business case.
Well, we're
selling the stuff. Why can't we burn it here to produce some cheap electricity?
Well, and the first, we know this from our work, but the first thing a major project looks at is power, right? It is one of the defining decision-making criteria on whether or not a project can proceed is access to power. And in Canada and in BC in particular, it's been very prohibitive because large-scale projects come in, and if there's not a line right by them, or the intertie is going to be too expensive, and then their lobbying effort isn't good enough to government that they can get them around, hey, we're going to actually use gas to, power the project for the first 5 years, and then we're going to hook up to hydro, then sometimes they can't proceed. So I do think that's a recognition on his part that in order to power the economy, literally and figuratively, there needs to be some new development there.
Yeah, I mean, for those folks that aren't familiar with BC history, BC was built on cheap electricity. It wasn't built on inexpensive labor because we've always had a bit of a challenging labor market here in British Columbia. It wasn't built on, we don't have a lot of head offices. It wasn't built on a lot of things you might build an economy on elsewhere. British Columbia's industrial backbone was built on cheap electricity, and our sort of only real advantage, other than a nice view, went away. And it is. Governments have to realize that if that was the only thing we built it on, if it wasn't because if our labor is more expensive, if we're further away from markets, we're never going to be a head office town because we're so far away from everything. What's going to attract capital here? And frankly, it's cheap electricity, right? That's it. If you look at BC's development since the 1950s, it was built on the back of cheap electricity, and the one thing that we don't have anymore. And so again, why are we looking hard at green energy? Because we need the electricity. Why are we looking hard at dams again? Because we need the electricity. This is really about inexpensive power that enables industry. Mines can't operate. You can talk critical minerals all you want. Mines are either going to run on diesel or they're going to run on electricity. And if you can't burn gas or diesel, you're not allowed to. You don't have any electricity. Well, I guess you're not going to have a mine.
100%. Yeah. Well, with that, I want to move on to our last theme today. My favorite, actually. I feel like it's the most spicy. But just this concept of the fact, do we have a market economy in Canada
How
anymore.
can I not get nerdy with these types of questions?
Well, I'm curious because, and I want you to explain this to our listeners, Melissa, because there are so many things happening that are dictating the way in which major projects can be developed in Canada. And it really causes me to often think, is this a free market economy in the way that it's meant to be?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that there's any version of a perfect market economy anywhere in the world, and probably for good reason, because we know that the theory of capitalism in terms of economics is a theory, and there's externalities and there's things that happen, and we don't have perfect information and all of these kinds of things. But I do think that one of the biggest differences that I see just in dealing with public policy and projects and investment and growth and GDP in Canada as well as the United States is the United States does a little bit of a better job, actually probably a bit of a better job of embracing that capitalist system a little bit more, and the market economy in that way as well. So I think that in Canada, we've always, maybe this is part of our culture, Byng, I don't know if you think so too, but we've always sort of, sometimes I think we think a full market economy or capitalism in certain iterations is like impolite sometimes. And we don't, capitalism and a market economy means success and sometimes massive success. And we've got tall poppy syndrome here, and we don't necessarily want anybody to be too successful or talk too much about it. And I think that that's a topic of conversation right now that's happening in society with, trillionaires, billionaires, all this kind of stuff. But I think that when it comes to building major projects in Canada, we do have a lot of government intervention in the government input, I think, into this. And that does distort pure market signals that companies are looking at. Whatever government a company is operating in, whether it's in North America, in South America, in Asia, in Africa, that government is going to look at where it can deliver returns for shareholders. And the reality is that in Canada, the more risk and uncertainty that we layer onto that, the less certainty that business has that it's going to be able to give those returns.
Going to make those choices.
And they have to.
So we live in Canada, and we in particular live in Western Canada. This is a resource economy. And people can say, I don't want to be a resource economy. I want to be a high-tech economy. I want to be all these other things. I want to, be an AI economy. The truth is, we're not a big enough population, and what we actually have are natural resources. And when you're selling natural resources, whether you like them or not, oil, coal, gas, copper, trees, what have you, you're selling that, you are a price taker. Mm-hmm. We can't sell it for what we want. It's a global price. We are price takers. And when you're a price taker, when the world decides what the price of oil, the price of coal, gold, or the price of copper is, then the investment can go anywhere in the world and just looking for where are my costs lower. And part of my cost is how fast can I build the damn thing, and will I get a return on investment? So a nice view, and it's nice here, isn't enough. Like if our primary export, our primary thing we're selling in the world are natural resources, and your natural resources are price takers, you better be one of the most attractive jurisdictions in the world, or they're just not going to come. They're not going to come for the view. And other people can say, well, we don't want to be extractive. We want to move to the AI economy, or we want to host Google. Well, in the first place, you're going to need a shitload of electricity. There's our explicit rating.
Better get that dam built.
Yeah, you're going to need all that electricity. So it's still a resource economy. And in the second place, because we are a small population on the edge of the world, not near big markets, like secondary manufacturing is very difficult here. This is what we're good at, and this is what we should be selling to build the economy and the future that we want. And this idea that we're going to do something else is usually a fantasy. We're going to become the next pharmaceutical center. Like we're just not.
I think so much of it right now, I think of the mineral exploration sector, and maybe it was because I was reading some of their press releases the other night, but they were saying how there's over 7% of BC's land mass is not available for mineral exploration right now, on top of already well over 40% for other reasons, parks and areas that aren't explorable. And that's a real issue, right? When we say that we want to be the center of mining and we say that we want critical minerals, and we are signaling to the market to come here and invest here, and then people come here and they realize, I actually can't explore in X, Y, and Z, and the goalposts are always changing. And I know that there has been some legislation proposed changes, one of them being the mineral consultation framework. And they really were trying to cut down time. And the average time to get a very simple mineral exploration permit through is still 201 days. And so when I think of examples like that, it's tough to say, oh, you should come here, and when you have other jurisdictions that you can go spend money in.
And it doesn't mean like we want to be the Wild West free-for-all,
not.
unmitigated
No.
capitalism. Like that's not going to happen. Like, that's scaremongering. Like, streamlining things. Just because I bought a Honda, not a Ferrari, doesn't mean my car's less safe, right? It just costs less, right? There's lots of ways to make an economy efficient and with proper regulation that protects the environment and protects the interests of people without making it sclerotic in its regulatory process. But it's bizarre. Like, anytime there's a problem, it's like, oh, let's create another agency, let's create another rule, let's create another law.
Yeah, and I think that part of the problem with us not, and this doesn't just happen with major projects and in natural resources, you can see it in tech and in other aspects of the economy as well. Part of the problem that comes is a cultural one. Like, when you only have a certain small percentage of people who are successful, or if you have people who are on their way to being successful that don't think they can realize that in Canada because of whatever reason, and it's not just limited to our ability to build projects, they're going to go elsewhere. And there's lots of data coming out now. Like, Canada actually has founders and contributors of a lot of major companies. Like, this is not related to major projects, but I think it's instructive to how major projects could have the same effect in other parts of Canada. But look at how Ottawa turned around from Shopify being there, right? Like, that town now has more millionaires because of the success of Shopify. That could be the same in like Prince George and Grand Prairie and Red Deer and all of these different places in Western Canada from the benefits that come with businesses being able to be businesses with proper restrictions, with, proper incentive structures. But that is good for everybody. Those people pay taxes, those people give back to their communities, they can afford to have children and buy homes, and all of those things are really good for society, and we're lacking a lot of those things right now.
Okay, I'm supposed to give my top 3 consequential provincial legislation, regulation, policy shift for major project development. Okay, number 1, I just looked at this. Number 1, stop putting constraints on Indigenous loan guarantee programs, right? Like, if you're going to have an Indigenous loan guarantee program to get First Nations involved in major projects and things like that, to align their interests with the industrial economy, if you're going to do that, stop putting handcuffs on it. Either you trust them to make decisions for themselves or you don't. So stop it, right? So we're going to have an X billion-dollar Indigenous loan guarantee program, federal, provincial, territorial, for whatever is the right thing to do, because you start putting handcuffs on things unnecessarily. Why? Because you're trying to satisfy 2 objectives. Not only am I trying to bring the Indigenous communities into the economy, but I'm also trying to satisfy some, environmental agenda, or I'm trying to satisfy some social agenda here as well. Focus, when you do legislation, when you do something like this, just let it do what it's supposed to do and stop putting handcuffs on. So number 1, if it's a worthwhile project for an Indigenous loan guarantee, then give it to them. 2, I would, I think we need another look at our permitting and environmental assessment processes. And everybody talks about it, and you're absolutely right, Melissa. Like, sure, we create MPMO, but we didn't deal with C69. Like, we've got to go through this stuff. People that say, well, if we look at this legislation, we're watering down environmental oversight. That's not true. You can't tell me that every piece of legislation that was passed about environmental protection is 100% right forever. Right? Anything can be improved. Anything can be improved. And improving for timeliness, what's magic about something taking long that makes it better? It's not magic, right? You can have a good, rigorous process and allow things to happen. Germany, when of course they had this gas crisis, when the Ukrainian war first started, had a gas crisis, needed to bring in some natural gas. They have high environmental standards. They were able to permit an LNG import facility in 6 months and built the damn thing because there was an imperative. Canada had this, we built the 3rd largest Navy in the world during the Second World War because there was an imperative. Like, we're capable of these things.
We've also built pipelines in the 1950s and permitted them quickly as well.
And many of them are still safe to this day.
Yes, correct.
Like, the one that that comes through our hood here has got a great track record. So those are sort of, there's two.
You took both of mine, so I'll skip.
So my third one is build the tunnel or the bridge.
Oh my gosh.
That's not a policy change.
That is a major project, though. My goodness.
Well, you know,
we even hear about that all the way
I
in
thought
Alberta.
maybe he was going to talk about it, but
Okay, I'm whining because we're just in the news that they're delaying this thing again. I'm
Whine
whining,
away, Byng.
but this speaks to a broader sclerotic problem. You know, what role does government have? Government does have the role to build the infrastructure to enable economy, right? We're talking about, like, there's a bid out for Roberts Bank too. So for those that aren't aware of it, it's a large sort of new island that's going to have a big container port on it. So, you know, Vancouver is the largest trading port for Canada, I think. And so millions of dollars of goods come through there every day. Things that you enjoy in your home are coming through that port. It's a major economic generator. So they're building this additional facility there. What goes to the port? Rail and trucks. What do rail and trucks need? Railroads and roads. And so you've got this bottleneck that's going to impede your ability to actually take advantage of this major industrial project that you're doing. And you have to consider that almost anywhere, right? Mines don't go ahead. They do go ahead, but they're less efficient and they're not as successful when they're in the middle of nowhere and they don't have a power line or a road. Right? You can't helicopter everything in. So the tunnel is an example of government not knowing what its job is and spend less time, you know, wringing their hands about what the private sector is doing and maybe focus on enabling, which is, you know, it's Canada's most important port, the Pacific Gateway. This is a critical piece to that. And so people think it's just about me getting in my car commuting. It is that. Don't get me wrong. That's pretty freaking important. But
No, but it is, talking about it doesn't make it so.
Yeah.
And execution in business and in government is everything. And if you do not incentivize, be it voters in the way that they evaluate elected officials and governments at the polls, be it government and how it incentivizes business, if you do not incentivize the right behaviors, you are not going to get the results you want. Show me the incentives and I'll show, like, this is the problem, is that we have set up a lot of, even us as voters, we have expectations of government that are not aligned with what we actually want from government. We want them to, you know, always reflect everything that we want. We want to always look to government to sort of like approve our own views. It's like, maybe we just want government to run things smoothly and on time and not hear about them. So should we elect governments that are sexy or shiny, or should we elect governments that are, you know, just going to get the job done?
well, one could argue the best prime minister of my lifetime was John Chrétien.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
And even though I didn't vote for him, is because he just ran the ship. He just ran it and ran the books. The books were good, put the economy, you know, the books in a good shape, and he just ran the thing. And he wasn't pursuing some pie in the sky agenda. Just pave the roads. Just pave the roads. Worry about the potholes. I don't need you to, you know, have some sort of. And I think that was the problem with our previous prime minister, is he had all these agendas that couldn't be fulfilled.
Solutions
Mel,
in searches of problems.
what are your top 3 or maybe 1, because we have limited time,
Yes.
policy issues?
I think C5 is going to be important, which is probably an obvious one, but here's why. C5 is not important because it's just important in a big
So
piece
what's
of
C5,
legislation.
just for anybody?
Building Canada Act. So this is the legislation that is supposed to be, you know, the source of us getting our economy going in Canada, the source of the major projects office, getting things built. The reason why I'm watching C5 is we have seen the theory of it, we have seen the vision of it, but we have yet to see the execution of it. And what I'm looking to see is whether or not we actually do have a shift in the direction that government wants to go in terms of building projects, or if we just have more rhetoric to convince people and be electorally expedient, because this is where the public is moving. So I'm going to watch, like, what is the first project that we see that is actually go in, has been listed, and actually goes through the whole process of C5 to the point where it is doing the thing that it was built to do. So moving pipeline, LNG, whatever it is.
Proof.
Exactly. Like, proof in the pudding, proof in the petroleum. You know what I mean?
Proof in the petroleum.
Yeah. So that's what I'm looking for, because I think if we do not see that in the next year or so, like we've already have several projects that have been designated, if we do not see that, then we have to ask what the purpose of it is. And if there is no purpose, then we need to focus on the things that are actually going to yield the results that we want and stop pretending that because we say something that it is going to be. Yeah.
Absolutely. Do you have any more?
Do I have any more? Well, I do think that, I mean, we talked about it a little bit. Sorry, I could talk all day. This is going to be controversial to say. I think we need to look, this is not directly related to major projects, but I think we need to look at how we incentivize entrepreneurs and people who build businesses in this country and not punish people for being successful. And make it difficult. Like we've seen some reversals in the capital gains exclusion rate, et cetera, that were proposed by the previous Liberal government. But we need to incentivize the heck out of people who have the capacity to build things on a small business scale all the way up to a large enterprise scale, and other people who can do those things in other countries to want to come to Canada. That is not to say that I want to have a Wild West tax system that means that, everybody gets off without paying their fair share. But again, just like companies will go to the place that is best for their business, individuals that are not constrained by country have the ability to be wherever they want and move their capital personally and business-wise, and business-wise, anywhere they want. They're going to move with their feet. And the fact that we have more remote work, et cetera, you have to make the country that you're living in, a place where smart people who are going to be building those major projects and, the people who are going to be working on those major projects actually want to live and be. And so I said tax system, but I think it's creating those communities that people actually want to live in. They feel safe. They feel like they can raise a family. Those are super important things because who cares if we can build major projects if nobody wants to have kids? What are we doing it for, right? So I think that's really important.
Agreed. Okay, I have one, and then we'll shut the show down for the day.
Okay.
Kind of controversial as well.
Oh, wow.
I just spent some time up in the Northwest Territories, which was very eye-opening. And one thing I walked away with that I had kind of thought about before going to the Northwest Territories, but it was definitely really apparent to me after visiting there, is that I really think we need to do something around getting more people into the military.
Oh, I love that.
So I really, and this is a whole host of things. We interview a lot of young people at Sedgwick for jobs here. I do think having a year of military service across Canada, I would have personally loved it, I think. But a year of military service, not only at a time when sovereignty has become so important, but also just from a getting out of your bubble of who you usually hang out with, who you've grown up with, and immersing yourself. Because part of the program I was a part of, I was with 15 other people from across Canada, all different jobs, all different sectors. And that was the most beneficial thing of that entire trip, was just being with people that think differently from different backgrounds. And I think if we had a year of service for, say, 18-year-olds in Canada, 17-year-olds, not only would it get people out of their homes and their kind of, some people will have comfortable lives, some people won't, right? Like they'll be coming from different places, and that's important. But it will also protect us as a country more. Being in the Northwest Territories, it was just so eye-opening how vulnerable we might be as a country in many ways. I think the current Carney government is doing a great job of kind of buffering that up and protecting us further. But I do think that would be an interesting piece of policy. I don't think this government is going to look at that. However, if I were in government, I would be looking at that potential policy for young people.
Well, and I think they're more hireable, frankly. The more well-rounded, I mean, I'm not talking about military service per se, but a more well-rounded person is more hireable. And we do interview lots of young people here. And, we're starting to, you see a bit of uniformity in them, right? Like high school, college, their degree, their interests, got some volunteerism. You see some uniformity. Mm-hmm. It'd be nice to see a little less.
Also, the reality of the situation is that this relative peacetime and post-World War II that we've lived in is not normal in human history. And we don't live in a world that is conflict-free forever, always. And I think that there are countries, we do have borders. And I think that the people that live within those borders, there's got to be like a unifying thing that brings people together, not just in wartime, but in terms of national pride and national identity, because it is not standard that we'll just be fine always, right? And we can't take that for granted.
Well, and to bring it back to our normal theme, which is major projects, is being proud of, not only proud of your culture, but proud of what you do and sell. And we are very good at natural resources. And, this comment that Carney, you don't need this straight hormones, you can use us. That's what we should be saying.
That's nation building talk, and I like it.
And deals with the issue of security. Right?
Absolutely.
So why not buy your copper and your oil and your coal and your natural gas and all the things we have here, because we have everything, nickel, uranium, you name it, we got it.
You want it, we got it, exactly.
Why not buy it from us?
You want it, we got it.
Yeah.
Canada. It's going to be our new national
Just opening up the
slogan.
thing, this Canada, we've got it. What do you want? I got it all.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Melissa, for coming on today and nerding out with us as we head into summer. Thanks so much to our audience for listening to this episode of Primary Risk. Please follow us to receive notifications of upcoming episodes wherever you might get your podcast. Check out the show notes for the variety of policies that we mentioned on today's podcast. We're going to be releasing a couple new episodes over the summer, so please be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks so much.
Thank you.